This is Oral Rehab Lecture 5, Part 4, the last screencast in Lecture 5. Again, picking up the slide numbering system so that the next slide here aligns with slide 19 in your slide set. The last point from the A2 work was that, and Gagne sort of brings this point up as well, was that an attempt at normalization for persons who have difficulty acknowledging hearing loss sort of first begins with the idea of meeting with other persons with hearing impairment. And again, as we sort of read some of the earlier materials, this is one of the benefits attributed to meeting in groups, in sort of AR groups, with other persons with hearing loss. Because in this case, meeting with other people, you're sharing your experiences with people just like you. And so all of you in the oral rehab group are all sort of outsiders kind of coming together. And so by meeting with other people, you learn that your own experiences are not uncommon, are not unusual, and in fact, other people have them just the same. So really the first stage in normalization, the first stage at sort of destigmatization, is again typically meeting with other people who have the same kind of conditions. So, we talked about, why is there such a benefit attributed to oral rehab groups? So again, we can see here that one of these benefits is simply that this is the first stage in normalizing by, again, interacting with other people who are sort of just like you and who have, the same kinds of problems. The second stage then in normalization and in destigmatization is then generalizing then to interacting with non-persons with hearing impairment, so people who are just sort of normal hearing people. But the presumption is, and the outcome of coming out of the first normalized stage, is that this person now is going to be now more assertive relative to their communication. They're going to be more confident in their communication, and they're going to be less self-stigmatizing, because they're going to really sort of learn that there's really there should be no stigma attached to this, and so then that's going to reduce their self-stigma. At least that's the idea. So again, the benefit of the oral rehab groups is to go through a sort of a staged process of normalization. Now, if we look at both literature and professionals' sort of descriptions of adults with adult onset hearing loss, you're going to see that that this group has a fairly typical set of adjectives applied to them. Again, we've already noted that they're stated to be in denial. They place blame. They feel guilty. They're frustrated. Although, as I say, their family may be more frustrated because they're the ones that have to kind of deal with the extra effort and so on. They're going to be angry, often directed toward the providers, or this anger is also directed toward the hearing aids. At least in my experience, is that persons who are hearing impaired and who wear hearing aids generally said never really liked them. And because of that, their judgments of hearing aids and of even the people providing the care for that hearing aid is often negative and maybe angry as well. We talked about shame because, again, the idea with shame has to do with their self-stigmatization, a loss of self-esteem, and in fact, a loss of independence as well. If a person can't, hear a server at a restaurant saying what the specials are that night, or what fish they have that night, or whatever the case may be, they're dependent on their spouse. So again, the server will go around the table and say, okay, here's what our specials are. What would you like? And the person with hearing loss has to look at their spouse and say, what did she say, or what should I order? That kind of stuff. And again, that leads to loss of self-esteem, loss of independence. Again, all of these things collectively or sort of individually lead the individual with hearing loss to withdraw from social situations because it's either A, too much work, or B, it's too painful for them to kind of engage in that respect. It's just you can kind of see that all of these kind of negative feelings, then the basic human response is to say, you know what, I'm just going to check out. I'm not going to even just deal with it, so I'm just going to withdraw. I mean, it may not be as blunt and as conscious a decision, but certainly all of those difficulties push them to just simply removing themselves from those situations. So, all is not lost, all is not bleak. That's why we're talking about oral rehabilitation, and a lot of the people that work in the field of in audiology certainly have as their basic professional focus is how do we help these individuals. I'll say to you now and again that we have to deal with their problems, which those might be technical, they may be emotional or psychological. We have to address their needs and bring them to some benefit. So again, we have to talk about making them do better in some situations than they did before. So if that's providing them with hearing aid amplification and helping them to do better, that's part of it. An audiologist friend of mine by the name of Jane Steckler said, you can't do oral rehab without getting to the root of their emotions. Jane had led an oral rehab group for the Veterans Administration in Los Angeles for many years, and knew on a sort of daily work basis how emotion-filled oral rehab was because she was working with veterans and their spouses. To provide it a little more concretely, there's other things that we can do. Now, this is an article you don't have, Clark 2010. It was in a source that I couldn't really copy for you, and you didn't have access to. So I'll just synopsize it for you here. That Clark stated that the clinician's motivational engagement helps the client's internal motivation. So as we engage with our clients, we have a motivational effect on them. And what are the things that we need to do, or what are the things we need to provide in order to do that? Information, education, encouragement, support, and then even more support. That's the kind of the point that he's trying to make. So as we kind of consider all this, that's sort of part of what we have to do in terms of the kind of care that we provide. Before we end the slide set, we'll talk about what the tools are that will help a person function better with their sets of conditions. But you can see that it's not just facts, but it's also support and encouragement. So some of this is certainly more intellectual or factual kinds of information, and then other stuff is really somewhat more on an emotional level. And again, that's all part of it. So ways to help. Now, I sort of, this is just grayed out because we'll get to that on another slide. So our focus right here now is just on this first part. How do we help? Acknowledge the realities of their situation. Realistic expectations is something that's very important, but also an acknowledgement of what their situation is something that in several of his articles Harvey points out is a very important aspect of what we do. One article that I'll feature here that's in your reading group is an article I think it's a great title. The Situation is Hopeless but Not Serious, Harvey, 1996. I guess he says not serious because people don't really die from hearing loss, and the hopeless part is, well, there's only so much we're going to be able to do for you with your hearing loss. So in The Situation is Hopeless but Not Serious, Harvey, 1996, he talks about moving toward a period or moving toward a stage of psychological benefit, whether you dealing with your hearing loss. 3 stages that he cites in this movement towards psychological benefit with hearing loss is basically confronting or coping with it, accepting the unchangeable, what he calls just grin and bear it, and then to transform their lives to benefits. The notion of stuck with lemons, make lemonade kind of contention. And then goes to sort of an interesting point here, and I don't know that I captured all of the ones that he had, but I listed at least 6 of them. He lists that and posits that there are benefits to having hearing loss. And so again, this would be, I guess, maybe points that he would share with persons with hearing loss, that these are some things for you. So, and he provides the examples of this in that article, so I'm not going to go point for point, but you can kind of look at it. That, a person who has hearing loss, this might be an opportunity for them to find an additional purpose or meaning in life. And by the way, you're going to see a lot of this stuff in your assignment number 4, where you're going to be reading the first person accounts. So in those accounts, you'll see, no doubt, any one or more of these 6 items there. So certainly to find meaning, that hearing loss now gives you a meaning or purpose in life that you didn't have before. That's one of them. Opportunity for psychological growth, greater appreciation of things, opportunity to become a whole, having dealt with pain, and so that again, is more of a psychological concept, I suppose. The opportunity to connect with others in ways that you hadn't before. Maybe more than any of the others in assignment 4, the opportunity to be an advocate is a transformational aspect of having hearing loss, and an opportunity for you to reevaluate life's goals. You're going to see again in assignment number 4 that any of these number of these benefits are going to be represented by those assignment 4 articles. And finally, now, our final slide here in lecture 5. Again, we did that already. How do we help them? Again, I said acknowledge the realities of their situation, provide realistic expectations, and finally, provide tools for positive adaptation. The primary tool we're going to talk about before too long is going to be amplification, other assistive devices like telephone amplifiers and other such things, oral rehab training programs, education for the family, significant other, referral to self-help groups such as the HLAA. Again, has been a very large part of helping persons with hearing loss, and then other resources as may be part of it. There was an article by Harvey, 2010, What Your Patients May Not Tell You, and in that he's talking about referrals to mental health professionals. We'll see when we get to talking more, maybe mostly about the elderly, that hearing loss is a component of late in life depression and an actual sort of psychological kind of problem. So as we conclude then lecture 5, we can conclude with the following ideas: that persons who have hearing loss are going to be influenced by and various psychosocial consequences. For the adult with adult onset hearing loss, this will be manifest mostly by aspects of social isolation, and it's sort of a downward spiral of social isolation and withdrawal. This will tend to affect the families somewhat more than the persons themselves, and likely their denial of their problems is reinforced by their disinclination to be stigmatized or to identify with either aging or with a condition that is shown to be something that society hasn't really valued, which is to say hearing loss. In lectures 6 and 7, we're going to continue this general theme, but in different sorts of, with a sort of different focus. So I'll pick you up then in lecture 6.